Hello, everybody, and welcome on into the channel. I am Martino Puccio. Alongside me, good friend, big Mets and Jets fan, Mike Phillips. Mike, how are you? Hello, everybody. This is kind of I don't even know how to describe this. Just Mets content that Mike and I just want to push out there. So there's so much to discuss, even though not a lot has happened within the past few weeks. But just happy to talk Mets once again, Mike. So how you been?
Doing pretty good, just sort of it's like calls like a check-in sort of the way I would describe it because they're kind of in that weird in between land right now between the winter meetings and spring training, which is about a month away here. So they've done some stuff, they have more stuff to do potentially. So there are a lot of ways they can go with this fan base where they can be very excited about what happens here or very mad. So we'll find out which way they end up going.
Absolutely. Polarizing sort of offseason for the Mets. Very divisive within the fan base. I think the majority of them are very upset with things that have happened. You know how fans are being very emotional about some of the fan favorites leaving, but within good reason, you know. And I was just thinking as well, it felt like pure torture last year waiting on the Juan Soto news. We're a
Yeah.
month past from when that would have happened last year. We're really, and this shouldn't be surprising considering where the CBA is looming in the background, right, Mike? Where teams are basically fighting with players and agents like, oh, should we sign a guy? And Kyle Tucker, who we're going to talk about, is probably the perfect example. Even Cody Bellinger. Are we going to sign these guys long term? Or should we just wait and try and do something short term that gives these players an opt out if they want to hit free agency after the CBA agreement happens next year? So there's just been so many moving parts regarding that. And also, the last time that we spoke, the Mets hadn't officially lost Pete Alonso and some of the other moves that they had made, dumping Jeff McNeil to the Athletics as well. So two of the bigger quote unquote signings that the Mets have made in that time, Mike, have been Luke Weaver from the New York Yankees, shocker, and then obviously Jorge Polanco from the Seattle Mariners. So we'll start off with Polanco first because this is the pseudo Alonso replacement, right? Like
Yeah.
we've heard he's going to transition over to the first base and also potentially be DHing for the club. But it kind of sounds like so far and where the team is at that he will be the opening day first baseman. So what were your initial thoughts on that move?
Yeah, at first I was like, okay, I like the bat. Don't love that he has never played first base before, and now we're going to throw him there after Stearns talk about run prevention. Apparently, we've learned since that Seattle was having him work pregame at first. They were going to move him there at some point. They never really did. So that's a positive at the least. He seems athletic enough that he should be able to handle a
Yeah.
position. Eventually, this is not exactly the money ball situation where we have Watt telling Scott Hatterberg at first base is very hard. It's not exactly that, but I do think for what they have, you like that he strikes out because he struck out right in half, which this team last year, you would say they struck out way too much.
Just a little bit in key situations, not something that we were yelling about in group chats often. But yes, the power is obviously not going to be Alonso level. But I also, and like we have discussed this, the Alonso power thing, like obviously he's one of the premier power hitters in the game, but I think a lot of people are still thinking that he's that 50 something home run type. I don't think I'd be surprised if he hits 45 home runs again with the way he's trending.
Yeah. Yeah, I would not expect 45 again from Pete because we talk about this off the air. And I'll mention it here. I feel like Pete Alonso's value, considering he doesn't defend very well, he's not a good base runner. We saw last year's issues throwing the bases. He scoops well, give him that. I think the thing with Pete is he's a lot more valuable as a 40 home run guy than as a 30 home run guy. As a 30 home run guy, that contract's a big overpay. As a 40 home
Exactly.
run guy, it makes sense. And you figure he probably does that for at least the first 2 years of the Baltimore contract. The back three, I understand why Stearns wanted no part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's pretty much why everyone else in Major League Baseball pretty much thought the same with the offers that were out there. Was really just Boston and the Mets apparently involved, and they weren't willing to go past 3 years, right? Where Baltimore, and we talked about this in the past with the Mets, that, sometimes if you're in an undesirable situation, you need to overpay. You need to give more years just to convince the player to go there. And that's ultimately what happened with Baltimore. So Jorge Polanco, we'll see. But the Mets are adding everywhere else, because a lot of people seem to believe that the Nimmo and Simeon trade is, oh, let's compare Brandon Nimmo's numbers to Marcus Simeon's numbers, when in reality, people should be comparing Simeon to Jeff McNeil and whoever else played second base, because that's the replacement that's going on there. Simeon isn't replacing Brandon Nimmo just as much as Jorge Polanco isn't truly replacing Pete Alonso like for like because he could DH. We'll see what happens with Ryan Clifford or even Vientos if they keep him. We'll discuss him a little bit later. So Luke Weaver, the addition with him. Listen, another Yankee in here. Weaver was fantastic in 2024. Noticeable drop off in 2025. Some people attribute it to coming back from an injury a little bit sooner than later. Cough, cough, Kodai Senga. Listen, it's not bad. This is just a 2-year deal. You're not asking him to be an elite setup guy, just a guy in your bullpen that you know is reliable and can have quality stretches. I'm fine with the Luke Weaver signing. I just don't think that it was one of those moves where people kind of were hoping for Suarez or some of these other guys like a Fairbanks or something that could come in and like very clearly is the setup guy if Devin Williams is your closer. What did you make of Luke Weaver? I think this is fine, but a lot of people are so skeptical of signing these Yankees bullpen pitchers.
A lot of the Yankee guys they brought over here, for the most part, have done well. The one exception, obviously, being Montas, who was not even a Yankee at that point. He was coming from the Brewers at the deadline. But for what the Mets want to pay relievers, they got good value on the two they added here because I don't think David Stearns wanted to add a 35-year-old Robert Suarez on a 3-year deal. I don't think he wanted to. I think they would have gone a little higher on Edwin Diaz, but Diaz, from what it sounds like, was more ring chasing than what the Mets were going to do at this point. They were not going to go pay like one of these top closers insane money. So I think considering, like he has a better track record than like Brad Keller at the same contract with the Phillies. So I think that's not a bad value.
Yeah, and some people prefer Keller, but at the end of the day, you know how volatile relief pitchers could be. If they have a stretch of 3 to 4 poor outings, it'll significantly affect their numbers for the rest of the year. They could just get skewed so easily. So those additions were just fine. And I think at the end of the day, the perception of the Mets offseason isn't going to change based off of pretty decent moves, right? Because you're losing multiple all-stars, fan favorites. Mets fans want to see that big splash, that those players that completely change the perception of the offseason, which pretty much rolls into Steve Cohen's comments, Mike, about how John Heyman reported this yesterday, saying that David Stearns has a capability of a budget being around $350 million, but with the potential of going past that if certain players would require it. And obviously you could see that on the two players with the thumbnails here on this video. What do you make of those comments kind of slowly being leaked out? Because Cohen obviously broke his silence on Twitter, tweeting out, who's saying that we're not going to have that payroll this year? And I believe it could have been the Athletic or the New York Post that had mentioned that.
It was the Post. The Post was on like
and now the Post unironically with John Heyman saying, no, actually the Mets budget is much higher than what was interpreted initially. So $350 million. I don't think this is surprising. Cohen has done this constantly. I go off of actions instead of words and reports because you don't really hear much in terms of reporting with the Mets. So $350 million with the payroll. I bet it will go past that, Mike, if the players and right deals are there. We'll see if that happens. But again, $350 million. Are you surprised by that being the number?
No, I mean, they're looking at Cott's contract is where I usually go for my contract numbers. Mets luxury tax number is 304 right now. So if you go get, like, let's say a short-term deal, high salary for Framber Valdez, that puts you, say, 340. And then Kyle Tucker comes back and says, hey, I'll do a short-term deal and I'll do like 40 million for 4 years and then opt out after 2. I don't think Steve Cohen would say no. I think he would do it. I think it's just the fit has to be right for that. It's not going to be you have to spend all money just because we have the money. I think it's if the player makes sense, we'll go higher than what I budgeted.
Exactly, which is why I also think, and we talked about this yesterday off air, why David Stearns, I feel, gets a little bit of a bad reputation when it comes to longer term deals. Obviously, I think he prefers shorter term deals just because of the volatility with some of these players, but there's always exceptions to the rule, or, contextually it matters. When Juan Soto is out there, of course he's going to be willing to give 15 years to a player that's in his mid to late 20s. Kyle Tucker is going to be turning 29. Sure, I understand teams being a little hesitant to give 10 to 12 years because of recent injury issues, which I think are a little bit exaggerated, but I understand being in the outfield position. And we know how Soto is likely not going to age great out there because he's not a terrific outfielder to begin with. So I understand the hesitancy. But the longer the market drags out, Mike, and you know this, opportunistic deals, and Steve Cohen is willing to pounce. I understand Billy Epler isn't here anymore, and this is not similar to the Carlos Correa situation, but Correa's injury history was far worse in his situation, and Cohen was willing to go to that 12, 300, whatever that offer was, where it was insane. I think Kyle Tucker, obviously being very well known by David Stearns from his Houston days, and how good he actually is. This is a top 10 outfielder in baseball. This could be a huge facelift for the Mets. And I guess we'll just hop right into it. Kyle Tucker. I would like to believe that if the long-term offer was out there from the Toronto Blue Jays, like is supposedly reported, he would have taken it by now. But it's very obvious that Toronto's offer, which is likely long-term, isn't enough in terms of AAV. Do you believe that? And do you think the Blue Jays are opening the back door for Dodgers or New York Mets to come in and swoop Kyle Tucker away?
Well, I mean, I think if they gave everything he wanted, he would have signed already. And this is
Right.
a Toronto team that we've seen has had trouble closing on these big free agents over the past few years. You know, they made the run at Ohtani, they couldn't get him. They made the run at Pete, and they didn't give him enough money to eventually lead him back to the Mets. They made a run that, I mean, they got Dylan Cease this year. They gave him a huge contract, and they gave him 7 for 2 talent.
It was like pulling teeth to get Vladdy to extend, right?
Yeah. I think they for my guess, it's longer, but I think you're right. The average money is probably not as high as he wants, especially
Right.
like when all these free agents looking at Juan Soto saying, look, Juan Soto got 50 a year, basically. Like,
Right.
why am I going to take 32 when Juan Soto is getting 50? So I think he's probably looking for, I want 40 a year would be my
Right.
guess. Because he knows he's
So,
not.
so like, yeah, perfect. Exactly to what you were like getting to is like, say the offer is like 10 years, right?
Yeah, it might be. This could be
Why
10.
why wouldn't Toronto do 10 for 400 with Kyle Tucker? Why do you think that might be a hesitancy on there?
That I can't tell you with Toronto because I do feel like they have a lot of opportunities here. They're theoretically could get Bo Bichette back. The reports now sound like the Phillies are going to be heavily involved there, which we can talk about.
Don Mattingly's like playing like a super agent, apparently, according to these reports.
Yeah, they have options, the Phillies. And I do think like Toronto, I don't understand it because the Rogers Center prints money and like they
Right.
can do like there were rumors they were the high bid on Juan Soto and they couldn't even get him. They were only go higher than Cohen did. So that take it
Supposedly.
supposedly. They had a high offer on Ohtani. So I think I don't know whether it's the living in Canada thing that the value of the dollar up there means maybe to go higher on the situation. That's also possible.
Yeah, and I find it a little odd because there are narratives around Kyle Tucker and his personality and fitting in some of these bigger markets. But I find it so funny because we had this conversation. First of all, he played in Chicago and Houston. We're
Yeah.
not talking about small markets there. Are they exactly the size of New York and LA? No. But Chicago and Houston are kind of as big as it gets, especially in the Midwest. And
Also,
again,
Chicago for the Cubs, not the White Sox, is also a big difference.
exactly, right? Like the Cubs are the prominent team in that town, and we know how the White Sox are operating. But also look at the 3 supposed finalists for this. It's New York, LA, and Toronto. Toronto, just because it's in Canada doesn't mean it's not a big market. Toronto is huge. He wouldn't be the star there. He actually wouldn't even be the guy to any of these teams that he signs with, right? Because if he comes to the Mets, it's
He's
Juan
number 2.
Soto and Francisco Lindor. He would be the number 3. If he goes to LA, there's Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, and all these other stars. If he goes to Toronto, it's still Vladdy Jr. there, who is the marquee guy. He would maybe be the number 2, right? So I find it very odd with this whole perception of him handling a big market when he's already done that. And the only teams pretty much that are finalists for him are big markets. So I kind of don't understand that angle. But go ahead.
It's also it's so interesting that like I know he lives allegedly in Florida, like not like 10 minutes from the Toronto spring training facility. So you're
Right.
wondering like there's enough stuff that you like there. You understand like there's some reason he just doesn't want to go there yet. And you think he's hoping that like either the Mets or the Dodgers like sort of step up and give him enough money that he can say, okay, I don't need to go to Toronto.
Right. Like I think that's fairly obvious. And I'm not even saying Kyle Tucker is not signing for Toronto. I would probably bet money today that if he were to sign somewhere, it would be Toronto. But as you know from me, the longer this drags out, the more the Mets have advantage with this. I kind of struggle to find the Dodgers going fully in on him just because of the fact that they don't necessarily need him. And I'm not entirely sure that they would blow out an offer from the Mets. I think the Mets would come in with the highest AAV offer because the Mets wouldn't bother if they knew LA was going to be offering that much on a shorter term deal. The reason why the Mets would be in here is because they would blow everybody out on a short term deal. Now, whether or not the Mets are going to be able to find a deal with Kyle Tucker that they're going to be able to close on that, everyone assumes, and Will Salmon wrote this in his article, he's assuming 4 years or less for the offer on Kyle Tucker, which is an educated guess. That's not a fact. Do you, Mike Phillips, think that Kyle Tucker could, if he were to sign for the New York Mets, sign for longer than 4 years? Do you see that as a possibility? And if so, it'd probably be with opt-outs, right?
Yeah, I would assume opt-outs are in there. I don't think you're getting him on 4 years. I think it's going to be at least 5.
Okay. So you would see 5 for 40 AAV.
Like I could see like a 5-200, like an opt-out after 2 or something.
Do you think there is a possibility that they have this jaw-dropping offer that you're like, whoa, the Mets are not playing around? That is like very clearly the best Kyle is going to get in a short-term deal. Because we've seen that before in the past with Steve Cohen, but that was with previous general managers, presidents. Do you think David Stearns views it like, and we'll get into the other outfielder that's an option for the Mets and seeing what he's demanding as of late, why he wouldn't go to Kyle Tucker at that rate?
Yeah, I think the question with this is obviously like that previous general managers, like those high AAV short-term deals were for aging Hall of Fame pitchers. Like I have yet to see I mean, Bregman's probably the closest guy, but he had a QO attached, so it was sort of stifling his market. It's rare to see the top of the market, number one clear guy say, I'm not going to get as many years as I possibly can to lock up long-term security, especially with the lockout looming next year. So, like, I wonder, like, I just don't see the universe where it takes less than 5 years to get Kyle Tucker on a team.
Yeah, I think if Tucker signs short term, there's definitely going to be those opt outs in there. We could potentially even see him go to LA, even ring chase, whatever, hit the free agency market once again. Wouldn't be shocking in that regard. Or he also could just like take a huge AAV offer that isn't necessarily 10 years. He's still relatively young, but no one really wants to hit free agency when you're 37, 38 years of age, right? If you could get the extra 2 years, he would be willing to do that. I do think the Mets would be hesitant with the 10 years just because of how him and Juan Soto would age at the same time. But, that's a problem for like what the 2033 Mets or something like that. So at the end of the day, where do you see Kyle Tucker signing? Do you think the Mets, if you would have to put it this way, actually, this is a better question for you. If you had on a scale of 0 to 100%, what's the percent that the Mets sign Kyle Tucker?
I think it's like 20.
Okay, so you're very low. You're very pessimistic regarding this then.
Because I think he's going to get years of Toronto, or if the market lingers enough, the Dodgers have done this before, where the Dodgers will just wait, let you set the price, and then say, okay, we'll match, and then he'll go there and say, I'm going to ring chase it because you guys won 2 in a row, and the Mets have made the playoffs like twice in 7 years.
I know it sounds silly, but with what Cody Bellinger is asking for, I'm going to actually put Kyle Tucker to the Mets at 40%. And I only say this because of the way it's been lingering. I think if Toronto clearly wanted this player, and they could just do this within the next couple of days, it wouldn't be shocking knowing my jinxes, they could get him easily. But it's been fairly obvious they're not making this easy, and they're not, meeting him on his terms. And now I think Toronto's left the back door open. And I think on a short-term deal, he would probably prefer the Los Angeles Dodgers. But the Mets on a short-term deal are going to have to significantly pay more than the Dodgers and or Toronto Blue Jays. So I think it ultimately comes down to, does Kyle prefer the short-term deal with higher dollars, or he just eventually settles with the Blue Jays? And I think that's a strong possibility. But one thing that is really going to be impacted by this Kyle Tucker deal is Cody Bellinger. And now from multiple reports and from what we're seeing, Cody Bellinger wants 7 years in a range of 36 to 37 million a year. I think that's a horrible contract. I don't think anybody should be offering more than 5 years for Cody Bellinger. His bat has declined. He played great within Yankee Stadium. His home and road splits, Mike, were not very good. He's a terrific defender, incredibly versatile, which I think ultimately is where he's going to have a market because of that. But as far as the bat goes and how he's going to age, 7 years is not like that's an embarrassing sort of thing. He's He got traded away from the Cubs because no one really saw him long-term like that. The Dodgers got rid of him because they didn't view him as a long-term fit either. The Yankees are certainly not going to go 7 years for him, and they know they don't have to bid against themselves. Ultimately, I think it's down to the two New York teams. Cody Bellinger is not going to sign with the Mets if he wants 7 years. I'd be surprised if they offered more than 5 years for him. What do
He
you
won't
think?
have to get either for 7 years because like nobody's gonna give him that long a term because the Dodgers are also lurking in this market. Like they're gonna be in that same situation. Like, okay, like we'll give you 4 years, a lot of money up front, basically. That's the way they would do it. I think the Mets do the same thing. And the Yankees would do the same thing. The thing is, Cody Bellinger, for some like wants the years because this is a guy who also has been, we mentioned he was he was non-tendered by the Dodgers a few years ago. He signed
Right.
the 1 year deal with the Cubs and got the deal with the opt-outs every year and with basically salary dumped the year like last year.
Correct.
Like he wants security. That's why I gave him his perspective, but the market's not gonna give it to him.
Exactly, and it's been a recurring thing for him when he's hitting the market, and I don't think his splits helped him whatsoever. I think the Yankees have the most leverage out of any team in here regarding him, in a sense, right? Because overall, the Yankees not being in on Bichette, not being in on Kyle Tucker, their options are very clearly limited when it comes to bats on the free agent market, and it
Well,
seems like their willingness to make trades, their farm system is obviously very thin from previous trades that they've made. And obviously going in for Juan Soto made a ton of sense. But overall, not really there for the Yankees. I think Bellinger is going to have to settle. I don't see him coming to the Mets. I understand the link because of the run prevention. He's still a fit in terms of, left field, could also play first base and center field. I just don't see Cody Bellinger signing with the Mets because if it's a 5-year deal, right, and he settles on that between the Yankees and the Mets, it makes so much more sense for him to go to the Yankees. I don't think the Mets are going to be offering so much more on an AAV compared to the Yanks that he wouldn't do that. I don't see the Mets doing 5 years at 36, 37 AAV, right? Like there's no way they actually do that because he's not going to age well enough for that.
no, I don't think so either. And the thing with the Yankees also is like you mentioned before with the Tucker situation, like the Mets are in there, the Dodgers are in there, the Blue Jays are in there. Like the fact that Yankees are not in there is very strange to me because like he fits that team perfectly.
He does, and I just think we know the direction that they're moving in, and this is also what happens when you're paying pitchers so much money as well, right? The money committed to Rodon, Cole. I mean, even not being further in on Imai was a little surprising for them as well because they were looking in that sort of starting pitching market. But I think they're just trying to be opportunistic, which is obviously not a characteristic that we're accustomed to with the New York Yankees. So Bellinger, where do you think he ends up? I think he ends up staying in the Bronx. I think they end up cutting a deal that makes sense for both sides. What do you think?
I think he probably goes back. There's my guess. But to elaborate on the Tucker point here,
Sure.
this is a franchise that prints money by the buckets full. Like they
Yes.
make money dollars hand over fist. They do not reinvest it enough into what the product is at the big league level because the way most fans, Yankee fans, seem to view this product, and I think I agree with this, is that they are content to build a team that can win 90, 95 games, sell out the stadium in the regular season, sell like a million chicken buckets. If they win a title by accident, great. But they just care about getting the butts in the seats. And that is not what the Yankees used to do. Like Kyle Tucker would be such a good thing for them because Aaron Judge's not going to be Superman forever. He's turning 34 this year. You got
Yeah, easy.
2 years of his prime left, you feel like, before he starts like not being Superman?
He's so unprecedented. It's hard to tell because he's literally one of the hugest human beings to ever play this sport. So you don't know how he ages, right? Because we see how Stanton is, but Stanton had a longer and worse injury history than Judge. Judge did have that stretch where it was hard to see him playing 162 every year. He's not an everyday center fielder. Him being a right fielder every day, probably a couple more years. But then eventually he's going to have to move to DH to preserve that bat. That is so incredible and maybe the best that we've seen since Barry Bonds. It's really difficult to kind of gauge where the Yankees are. I agree with you. Kyle Tucker should have been the move for them. So switching to the other needs of the New York Mets. Starting pitching. Starting pitching was the biggest issue last season outside of defense for this ball club. We have seen them move off of, obviously, Frankie Montas because of his Tommy John surgery. We're seeing this trio of young, super talented pitchers come through the system that have made their debut towards the latter end of the year. It seems like they're probably going to break camp with Brandon Sproat and Nolan McLean. Doesn't seem like Jonah Tong will break camp because he never saw he had a cup of coffee in AAA. So I think he will start back there, especially with his struggles at the major league level. That wouldn't surprise me. Obviously, the Santucci's and Wenigers are obviously looming in the system, and then there's Christian Scott. Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, David Peterson is still there as well. The Mets very clearly need somebody that they could depend upon because all the names that we tossed out there, and as talented as Nolan McLean is, as talented as Brandon Sproat is, none of the pitchers I named, in my opinion, Mike, are guarantees for next season. The Mets need to do something. They're looking at short-term deals, which we'll talk about in a moment. But you always hear and read in reports that the Mets are on the market for a starting pitcher trade. We have seen Edward Cabrera just get traded over to the Chicago Cubs. We saw Baz go over to the Baltimore Orioles. The cost is still relatively high, right, Mike? A little bit lower on Edward Cabrera, but we see the Freddie Peraltas of the world. Brady Singer was also a name kind of floating out there. Nick Pivetta was another name mentioned with the Mets. I'm probably forgetting another guy or two. Starting pitching, I think it probably makes the most sense. I mean, Scooble, I'm not even going to discuss. Starting pitching for a trade makes the most sense for the Mets, considering the plethora of middle infield and infield talent that they have at the farm system, which is top 5 in baseball.
Yeah, they should trade for a pitcher. And I still think you can find a way to get Peralta off Milwaukee. I think they're probably the best trade you're pursuing here because, yes, might have to give up a big piece here, but Peralta at especially if you want to go bananas on Kyle Tucker, having Peralta for $8 million is a big help in that regard.
What do you think a package would look like for someone like Peralta? I personally think the Brewers do have some leverage in this situation because he is very cheap.
Yeah, everybody can be on him.
Exactly. But at the same time, we all know they're going to move off of him. And, to the point of a lot of reporters that they're making, they've seen Willy Adames walk out the door, really get nothing in terms of major compensation for that. You're better off getting something in a trade. You're not signing Freddie Peralta long-term. That ship has sailed. And you've survived losing many All-Stars for many years. Do they do that again? And Peralta is such a gem. And to your point about price, I think the Mets probably should and try and make a move for it. And I think a lot of it is also based on the familiarity that David Stearns has with the Milwaukee Brewers and their system. What kind of framework do you see in a deal here? What player would be the headliner in a package going back to over there? Is it a Vientos? Jet Williams, I don't think is going to be traded for Freddie Peralta. I only see him for Tariq Skubal. What is the best minor league player or player that's already played in the majors for the Mets that would go back for Freddie Peralta? What do you see?
I think they're going to ask for either one of the young pitchers. I think they're going to ask for either one of the big three. McLean's probably not available. Probably going to ask for Sproat or Tong. If you try and counter with, okay, we'll give you David Peterson, they're going to say, give us Jet Williams because they have such a market for him that they can say, okay, if you don't want to meet this high price, somebody will because he's a kingmaker for a lot of rotations.
So a framework deal of a Vientos, say, and David Peterson, and you obviously need some younger, talented players. I think a Santucci or even a Weniger could be involved in these deals. The Mets don't feel comfortable giving away one of those top 3 players. And I don't think any of those top 3 starting pitchers for the Mets prospect-wise is going in a Freddie Peralta deal. I don't think Peralta is that sort of player that you trade for with 1 year left on his deal. I think Skubal's the guy that they would be more comfortable with because he's just that talented. Freddie Peralta is an all-star level pitcher. He's top of the end rotation sort of talent, but I'm not sure the Mets should be parting ways because we've seen the cost of these talented pitchers, like what Edward Cabrera went for. Sure, he was fantastic last year. There was question marks on him, and he was still worth a lot of money. The way David Stearns will view it is all right, I have some of the young and best talented minor league starting pitchers in baseball. Why am I giving up one of them for 1 year control of a starting pitcher, regardless of how good Freddie Peralta is? I'm having a hard time seeing that. And the problem is, too, Mike, with some of these middle infielders that they have, Acuna, Vientos, Ronnie Mauricio, these guys don't have high value. right? You're going to have to package multiple of them to even fetch somebody back in a trade. And this isn't necessarily a salary dump from Milwaukee. I just find that difficult. And is
You
Jet
also have to
Williams
remember,
really
yeah, you also remember too, Milwaukee is just won 97 games last year, and they still have a tour of that team together. But they're not going to want like lottery tickets. They're going to want somebody who can help them right now in terms of trying to win right now, which is why I think like they want one young pitcher. I think the Mets will probably balk at because they say we're not going to give up potentially 6 years of Brandon Sproat for 1 year of Freddie Peralta. I think the interesting angle here is I think
Hmm.
that Williams thing. I think the important remember here is that for as talented prospect as he is, he has had issues with his wrist, which is not good for a hitter, and he's a physical outlier essentially because he might
correct?
be shorter than Jose Altuve. And the history of guys that small making a big impact in the majors is very limited because you could say, okay, if he's our Jose Altuve, that's fantastic. But if he's, Marcus Giles, so he has like a couple of good years as an average player, that's not a great value proposition. So for me, I'd be more open to moving a Jet Williams, that kind of deal, and say he's the headliner, take David Peterson back and, pick your young infielder. Otherwise, at the big level, it's Acuna, Vientos, Mauricio. Say go with that. And then let Milwaukee have fun trying to figure out if he's Jose Altuve or not.
I don't disagree with that at all. And I think your perception of Jet Williams is also right because where is he going to play for the 2026 New York Mets or even the 2027 one, right? Because we've heard talks, he could play center field too. Do you want a 5'6" center fielder? You probably want him playing second base, but Simeon is there who's a Gold Glove level still. So Jet hasn't even proven to stay healthy enough or be elite enough, and he's still considered an elite prospect. And he very well could be strong and a good player. But when we're talking about his comps, like you mentioned, it's Altuve, it's Dustin Pedroia. So two of the biggest outliers at that position in league history, two of the greater second basemen of this century. If that's what we're talking about here, the bust potential is very high with him. But at that point, if he's still that high of a prospect and
Cash
the
in.
ceiling is high, why don't you just be aggressive enough in a deal for Scooble then? If
I
that's
think
like kind of the framework.
I think you need a lot more than just him for Scooble. I
Oh,
think,
of course. Absolutely. You need to throw in Tong, Jet Williams,
yeah,
obviously those infielders that we had discussed. Apparently, Detroit loves Brett Beatty, from according to reports. So we'll see what ends up happening there. Ultimately, I'm not sure the price in the starting pitching trade market is going to come down, which leads me to believe that the Mets' sweet spot for this offseason and adding a starting pitcher should come from free agency. And I think a short-term deal for either one of Framber Valdez or Ranger Suarez would fit the Mets' need. Mike, if you had to pick between the two of them and you're guaranteed a short-term deal here, who do you want? Valdez, there's a lot of innings on that arm that some people are skeptical of. And as far as Ranger Suarez goes, really talented pitcher, but he never really throws that many innings. So what would you pick if you were David Stearns?
yeah, I think I would take the Framber gamble here because I think the one thing that you want here is you want somebody who can throw innings. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think Ranger Suarez has ever qualified for an ERA title. He never throws enough innings to do that here. And you have a lot of guys who are in that 140 inning range. If Framber gets you close to 200, that's a big help for your team as a whole. And I think, like, in fact, he's, proven as a top of the line guy. He has a sinker ball that will play well at the improved defense. I think that's who you want in this situation.
Exactly. And the only skeptical thing that has been coming with Framber outside of obviously those innings that he's logged is that incident that he had where he threw the wrong pitch at his own catcher. And obviously one of the bigger stories this offseason with the New York Mets was clubhouse issues.
Yeah.
Do you think that presents more of a problem for them when addressing him? Again, Stearns has the familiarity with him. There's some Astros guys within our system or within the Met system, excuse me, that have been working with them. I think it's a little bit overblown. It was one incident. We haven't really seen much of Framber or heard about him being that bad of a teammate. I would move in on Framber here. I think Suarez is really somebody who would fit better in Baltimore. I think him as quality. There's just not enough innings being logged with him. If Ranger threw for more innings, I'd say go in for him. But for me, Valdez is just proven on every level. And if it's a short-term deal, it's a short-term deal. Like, who cares at this point? It's not going to be handicapping you from going after Tariq Skubal next year, right? Because David Peterson could leave, Senga could leave, Manaea would only have 1 year left on his deal at that point. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of the rotation there. For me, the Mets have to go in for Framber Valdez. I don't really care about payroll at that point. It seems like the longer that it drags out, as we mentioned with Tucker and Bellinger, that he's probably going to get a shorter term deal on a higher AAV. I don't actually see anyone on the free agency market outspending the Mets with that.
Yeah.
The Yankees aren't going to do it. The Dodgers aren't going to do it. The Cubs aren't going to come back in for it. Toronto's not going to do it. They paid Cease. Philly isn't going to do that either. If they get another starting pitcher, it's probably going to be Ranger Suarez returning, and I don't even think that's going to happen either.
Their money's going to yeah, the Philly money's going to Bo Bichette, if anything else.
Exactly. So, which is really strong rumors at this point. I don't see how the Mets are in a perfect fit for Valdez. And the way I see them approaching this is they're waiting for him to literally just fall into their lap, offer that high short-term AAV.
Like I think
Framber Valdez will be a Met.
Yeah, I think basically like you look at the amount of money the Mets paid Verlander a year, where it was like 43 a year, and there was like I think that you do that add a third year to it, give an opt out to the second year. I think that's the kind of structure where like you're getting him like 3 for like 135, something of that scale. I think gets it done. And my point on the innings with Valdez, I pulled it up for both these guys the last 4 years, which is basically when Ranger Suarez get a full-time rotation member. Valdez, the last 4 years, has thrown 201 and a third innings, led the league in 22, 198, 23, 176 and a third in 24, 192 last year. Suarez, that same span, 155 and a third, 125, 150 and 2/3, 157 and a third. That's a huge difference.
Yeah. Substantial amount of innings. And not once did he come close to even Framber's lowest year. It was about 30 innings or so, right, that you had mentioned. So, yeah, for me, I think this is a layup sort of move. And obviously, if the prices are too high in terms of trading for starting pitchers and a team actually does swoop in for Valdez or offers him really long years, then sure, Ranger Suarez. But I only see that as a last-ditch sort of option for the Mets. So I think if they were to sign one of these two pitchers, it's definitely going to be Valdez. Any other final points or pitchers that you could see the Mets be in free agency?
I know there's speculation about, they can go to the mid-tier like market for guys like Chris Bassett or Lucas Giolito. Like, they don't need more of those guys. They have enough of those guys in the rotation. Like, you need somebody who gives you innings and the ability to go deep into games, which that killed them last season, was that they destroyed their bullpen by May because the Stars weren't going deep into games. And then the guys who didn't get back weren't effective. So they need that one guy to say, okay, he's going to give me 190 innings this year, and then we'll slide everybody else behind them.
I think that they would only do those mid-tier guys if they got a deal done for Peralta, where it's only $8 million and they're able to just add another starting pitcher that won't break their backs.
But even then, though, like, let's say you swap Peterson out for Peralta, you still have too many guys that you're adding another guy into the mix.
I don't think it's too many guys because of how they view the bullpen. And there's still, I wouldn't say a lot of question marks. There's no guaranteed bullpen usage out there, right? Like, it's Raley when Minter comes back to Weaver's 3. You could say Dylan Ross will be involved. Christian Scott will be involved. And obviously Devin Williams. I don't think there's guaranteed locked in relievers right now. And I think they could be comfortable with putting someone in the bullpen that are one of these starters. I don't think it'll be Senga. I think Senga they view as a starter. I don't see them doing that with Peterson. Manaea, on the other hand,
he's gonna get every chance to start because $25 million for a long man is for a multi-inning guy.
No, you're right. You're right. It's a very fair point on that. I guess it was just the way I'm just like thinking or breaking it down. But you're right though. We'll end up seeing what's happening there with the starting pitching with the Mets. I think that is obviously their biggest need in terms of the front end of that. Yeah. So let's just kind of talk about some outgoing players. Mark Vientos is one of these guys who's out of options. The same goes for Luis Angel Acuna. Just a plethora of players in the positions that these two would operate in. Acuna could be their Nick Madrigal type, right, for this season, or even the Jose Iglesias a couple years ago. Acuna's got a good glove. He's elite on the base path, like elite, like top 99th percentile type of runner. He could not hit a lick last year.
Yeah.
He did okay in winter ball, blah, blah, blah. We saw a little bit more of the pop. We saw pop in 2024, a little bit more. He was lifting the ball. Last year, we didn't see any of that.
Yeah.
I think that they pretty much have to trade Acuna for the most part, unless they really feel comfortable with him being that super utility player, as you mentioned. That also could be Jet Williams. I don't know. I don't see how you could keep him and Vientos with the options that they have and the inconsistency, especially more so on Vientos' side with hitting. Something's got to give with these two, right? Do you end up seeing, say, by trade deadline, Mark Vientos and Luis Angel Acuna on the Mets roster, or are they both gone?
I just think you can't run this back where you have all these guys here and not playing. And I know last year it hamstrung them down the stretch where they basically had to let Ryan Mauricio ride the bench for a month and a half because they didn't want to pick up enough days for him to lose the minor league option. Now, I mean, they could send him down, but Acuna, I think, does have value as a very cheap defense, super subs, base running kind of option. And you look at his baseball savant page, he's a 97% in sprint speed and like a very high base running value. So that's something it's a valuable to have that guy making nothing on your bench. Mark Vientos, if he doesn't hit and he can't be optioned, he has no value in this team.
And I think that's the ultimate question with Vientos. And we were debating with our good friend Will yesterday about it. And you guys, I'm more bullish on Vientos than I think the both of you are. I know you're more in the middle ground with him. I think it's worth keeping Vientos on this roster unless you get that guaranteed starter in a trade. I think it's worth sticking it out with Vientos. I understand he's a DFA candidate at that point because of the lack of options, similar to as to why Jose Butto was traded, right? I like Vientos' upside as a DH. I think this is exactly where he needs to be. The Mets were moving him around too much, in my opinion. Third base here or first base over there. Beatty was too good of a defender to move off of there, and his bat was decent enough. I think Mark's start to last year was poor and unlucky a little bit with that rough stretch. I think he was like 2 of 32 or something like that. Then he had the hamstring issue. He's really not quick on the base pass. Obviously not a plus glove. Doesn't have elite power, but good enough power that he could reach 30 home runs if that's the main thing that he focused on. Ultimately, I'm not David Stearns. I don't know how he views Mark Vientos, but he did comment at the GM meetings and other meetings in this offseason that Mark will play where his bat plays. So as of right now, where this Mets roster is at, Mike, there isn't a clear-cut DH, especially if Polanco is the first baseman. I think Vientos is your opening day DH. That you could see somebody like Ryan Clifford come up midway through the season. We don't know. Or other guys shifting to go play that DH role. For me, Mark Vientos is worth keeping unless you get a stud starting pitcher. What do you agree? Or do you agree or disagree?
I think he's probably here unless they get like a Kyle Tucker or a Bellinger. I think at that point they will move him and try and trade for the pitcher. I think these kind of go hand in hand with each other, where I feel like they're not going to sign, for example, both the starter and one of the outfits. I think they sign for one and trade for the other.
Okay. But yeah, as of today, I think Mark Vientos will be on the Mets opening day roster. And some of the guys kind of involved in the Mets opening day roster may or may not be are the minor leaguers that have taken everybody by storm, in my opinion, because of how quickly this farm system has kind of turned it around since 2023. We have seen how well David Stearns, Yeagers, and all these guys in their developmental system have elevated the farm, right? We knew they were like talented blue chip kind of prospects from past regimes of the Jet Williams of the worlds and so on and so forth. Obviously, Sproat, Tong, and others were under Epler. I think that with the plethora of players that the Mets have, it's going to get interesting because you mentioned Mauricio, Beatty, Vientos, Acuna, Jet Williams. These are all guys close to promotion or have been promoted and graduated from the minor league system. We're starting, and we're also seeing the AJ Ewings of the world, who our good friend Will thinks is Bigfoot. We also have Jacob Reimer, who is a really talented third baseman in hitting, but not a great fielder. Something's kind of got to give, right? With this farm set, they don't have positions for everybody here. What do you kind of make of this like top 100 and top 10 that we've seen from the Mets? Because we're not even talking about the Elian Peñas of the world yet, who a lot of people are high on, but the Santucci's, Wenigers, you want to include Christian Scott with this, Jet Williams, AJ Ewing. I mean, the Nick Morbidos of the world too. There's just so many guys. What have you made of this Mets farm system? And do you think Stearns is going to be aggressive enough that he doesn't have to worry when he eventually makes a trade, because the farm is stacked up right now? It's not what it was when he took over in 24.
Yeah, I think at some point there has to be a consolidation trade made where you like ship off like 2 or 3 of these guys to get you one big player somewhere, whether that's, one of the starters like Peralta, or a deadline move for Skubal, or whether it's, an outfielder, like a big time like hitter that we're not seeing on the market yet. Like the problem is like you cannot roster all of these guys and they all play the same positions. Like that you lose your value that way. So you end up being what happens at the Yankees at some points, where it's like hold on to guys for too long. Their value depreciates to nothing. You either got to play them or trade them. You'll just hold them forever.
Yeah, because it is interesting when it comes down to, say the Mets sign a Kyle Tucker, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden AJ Ewing and Carson Benj have a bit of an issue there, right? Because Ewing's a top 10 prospect. Benj is top 5 within the system, top 100 across baseball. Who do you move? Who do you keep? Like, then do you, like, to your point, are you able to toss in Ewing and Jet Williams and Vientos in a package for a player? I just, and especially when it seems like Benj is going to have a real opportunity to make the opening day roster, whether it'll be in center or left, is obviously contingent upon who the Mets sign in those positions, because I don't think Tyrone Taylor is a lock to start for this team. Do I see him starting on opening day? Surely possible, given his glove and all that. Yeah, man, like it's a good problem to have, yes, obviously. But the more we think and talk about this, something's got to give, right? To your point.
Yeah, because you can't literally, like, you have a 40-man roster spot. You can't put like 7 middle infielders or 8 center fielders or 15 pitchers, like starting pitchers on there. You have to be able to like cash in some of these guys. And that's what the job that Stern have to do, is figure out like, who can I move? It's not going to burn me too much in the long haul, because we've seen it go both ways in the Mets, where we were screaming to trade Jared Kelenic for Edwin Diaz. That worked out for them. Yeah. We saw them trade Pete Crow Armstrong for a half a year of Javi Baez and a year and a half of Trevor Williams. That did not work out for them. So you just have to know it's a little bit of science, luck involved, a little bit of science involved. You got to know, like, who do I have to keep and who can I move in the right spot?
Yeah, I think at that point, this is where it's really difficult to get into David Stearns' mind and what he's thinking ultimately and how he values these prospects. Because the demand for Skubal, I think there's more friction there with that arbitration case where Skubal's asking for 31, Detroit comes in with 19. I'm not saying that, they're going to trade him based off of that. They're probably going to meet in the middle and keep him for this year, even though I think they're making a mistake with this. This is Manny Machado 2.0, to be quite honest with you. I've said this for over a year now. I just don't see how they're going to do that. Ultimately, it's a waiting game. It's a game of chicken. And I think, too, Mike, a lot of people are kind of downplaying the CBA.
Yeah.
Because why are you trading all these prospects if there could just be a significant change in the landscape and roster building? And, if there's a salary floor, for example, there's definitely not going to be a salary cap. I think it's just bullshit. It's hot air. There's no way that the richest of owners are going to agree to that on top of the players. Yeah, something's got to give there. So we'll see what ends up happening, but great news to see the Mets. And one of the last things I'll mention too, in our minor league system, we have seen these pitchers graduate, and we've seen how good the development has been with the pitchers. I'm really eager to see how well the Mets develop hitters now. We've seen it turn around a little bit with Alvarez, right, at catcher when he came back up from the minors. We saw Brett Beatty sort of take a leap. We'll see if that is going to be a long-term thing with him. But I'm very just curious overall of the players who've been in the minor league system for a couple of years now under this regime. How well do they hit? Because that's a huge turning point for a Carson Benj. Like, if AJ Ewing is legit, if all these guys are legit on top of these pitchers, then I think the Mets and David Stearns would feel a lot more comfortable with trading away certain guys. So I just think I just find that fascinating. Any other notes or comments on the prospects before we wrap up here?
No, I think we're good on that front.
Okay. The Mets are playing on Peacock on opening day against the Pittsburgh Pirates. We'll see what happens. There's kind of a bunch of jokes out there saying it'll be Skubal versus Skeens. I think it also really depends on the World Baseball Classic and how far Team USA goes and relative to where Skeens is pitching and all that kind of stuff. What do you make of it? You like Peacock opening day for baseball and the Metsies being on there against the Pirates?
Well, I'll be in the building, so it's not going to make any difference to me. So I'm not going to see that broadcast whatsoever. So no difference to me. But I feel for the Met fans who have the best hometown booth in baseball to not get those guys on opening day. I think remember last year too when they started the Astro series, they got them on guaranteed them on opening day, and then missed out the next 2 days because they were on Apple TV Plus on the Friday, and then Fox on the Saturday. So
yeah.
That's tough. And I do look at the NBC schedule here for this. That's an NBC game for the Mets also, which is also it's NBC and Peacock. That's a nice little exposure situation for the Mets there.
It is, and I'm a little biased having worked at Peacock for a couple of years. So I'm really excited to see how they do that. Obviously, it was kind of odd a couple of years ago when they would schedule those those noon Sunday games, right? I think what they're going to do is much better broadcasting. But come on, GKR is kind of hard to miss out on. It's going to suck. Hope you have a great opening day over there. We're really not far away, March 26th or 27th, and we're sitting here on January 9th. So everybody, we appreciate all of you who might have tuned into this or checked out some of our clips. We greatly appreciate it. Mike and I are kind of ironing out the kinks that kind of go along with these recordings. So again, everybody can go and follow you at mphillips331 on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You do a bunch of content, obviously, or Just End the Suffering podcast is something that you've been working on for so many years and have had great success on. Obviously, huge Mets conversations that you and I have had on there for many years. Anything else that you want to plug for the good people?
Also, if you are a Star Wars person, check out the Sky Guys podcast as well, because we are getting ready, because I'm not sure if you heard, there's a Star Wars movie coming this year involving the Mandalorian. So you're going to start going back and watching some of those old Mandalorian episodes.
You know me and how I feel about the hyper consumption and production of all these shows is just annoying to me. A quick thing as far as awards go, by the way, are you disappointed in Andor not getting anything? Because you were highly laud that show.
I'm more disappointed they were not nominated. That's
right, exactly. That's kind of what I was getting. Yeah, no nominate. It's
in the acting categories specifically, because they did win a Emmy for best writing for a drama, which is almost unheard of for a Star Wars project.
Okay, so I
can't argue with The Pit winning best drama. I've seen that show; it's an insanely good show. I would say I'm more disappointed that the Emmy voters as a whole tend to sort of once they find a show they like, they just nominate everyone from that show. And last year, are you a White Lotus guy?
I did not watch that. No, I was not really interested.
It was basically everybody from the White Lotus got nominated for everything, and the show, it was probably the worst season of the show thus far. And there were a few who deserved their nominations, but to the point where I don't need to see every cast member of the White Lotus get nominated. I'd like to see some other shows get recognition.
Fair enough. So we'll see how they do in award season. Again, you guys could follow me at Martino Puccio everywhere. A lot of AC Milan soccer content, but obviously been doing Mets stuff for quite some time and angrily, hugely disgruntled Jets fan. So be sure to check out all that kind of stuff. Mike, thank you so much once again. Looking forward to doing more of these. And like and subscribe to the channel, guys. You'll see a bunch of clips uploaded over here. Thank you and see you next time.